Have you ever noticed how some people love you the loudest when you have something to offer and disappear the moment you fall silent? It starts subtly, almost imperceptibly. You begin to feel like a mirror reflecting someone else's needs, a convenience disguised as connection. Their affection shines when you're useful, when your presence feeds their emptiness, when your success gives them something to stand near. But when your light dims, when you're the one in need, their warmth cools into polite distance. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's survival, but still it stings. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who like the idea of you, your strength, your laughter, your resources, but not your fragility. You can feel it in conversations that end the moment your tone shifts from bright to tired. You can sense it in the silence after you stop saying yes. In those moments, you begin to understand not all friendships are built on care. Some are built on commerce. Emotional commerce. The kind that trades attention for validation, kindness for access, empathy for advantage. It's easy to confuse this for love, because, on the surface, they seem loyal. They show up when the world applauds you, repost your achievements, and tell you how proud they are, but their pride is borrowed. It's not about you, it's about their reflection in your glow. When you fail, their silence isn't cruelty, it's inconvenience. You no longer serve the image they need to feel close to the spotlight. Psychologists call this instrumental relating, when someone unconsciously treats relationships as a means to fulfill personal needs rather than to connect authentically. It's the emotional economy of our time, shaped by scarcity and self-preservation. But it leaves you hollow, because when friendship becomes transactional, trust rots beneath the surface. You begin to second-guess every compliment, every favor, every "I'm always here for you." You start wondering if love itself has turned into a currency, and if the price of belonging is pretending you don't notice. But you do notice, you always have, that quiet ache after a conversation, where you listened for hours but were never asked how you were. That uneasy guilt when you try to pull back, only to be accused of being distant. That sinking realization that maybe, all along, you were someone's emotional ATM dispensing comfort on demand. And yet, beneath the cynicism, there's a longing, the hope that somewhere there are still people who show up not to take, but to see. People who don't measure your worth by your usefulness. People whose loyalty doesn't depend on what you can provide. Because deep down, you already know, the purest friendships aren't built on balance sheets. They survive the seasons when there's nothing left to trade. And that's where the real story begins, in what happens when you stop performing your worth and start demanding truth instead. It begins in the smallest of moments, moments so ordinary they barely register. A child standing in a living room, holding up a drawing to be praised. A report card slid across the table, waiting for approval. The silence that follows determines everything. When the parent smiles, the world feels safe. When they frown, the air thickens with fear. It's here, in this quiet exchange, that the child learns something dangerous: that love is not a birthright, it is a bargain. You grow up believing that warmth must be earned, that affection is conditional, that being seen requires performance. Each gesture of kindness becomes a transaction. Be good, be helpful, be impressive, and maybe, just maybe, they'll stay. In psychology, this is called conditional positive regard, a concept first identified by Carl Rogers, the father of humanistic psychology. It's the foundation of an anxious attachment style, where love becomes a test you must keep passing to remain worthy. You don't realize it then, but you're being trained to measure your value in usefulness. You stop asking, "Am I loved?" and start asking, "What can I do to be loved?" Picture that child again, sitting at the edge of a bed, watching their parents argue. They promise themselves that if they can make everyone happy, peace will return. that if they can just be enough, no one will leave. This belief follows them into adulthood, into friendships that feel like ledgers, relationships where generosity is never free. You keep giving, not because you want to, but because you're terrified of what happens if you stop. Somewhere deep inside, the child still fears the silence that comes when love runs out. It's why, as adults, you might find yourself drawn to people who need saving, friends who take more than they give, partners who mirror the same conditional warmth. It's familiar. It feels like home even when it hurts, because the nervous system confuses comfort with safety. Dr. Gabor Mate calls this the repetition of pain as a search for love. You return to the same pattern, hoping that this time, giving more will finally make you enough, but it never does. Because what you're chasing isn't love, it's permission. And when you realize this, the truth cuts deep. You've spent your whole life mistaking usefulness for worth. You've learned to trade your empathy for acceptance, your boundaries for belonging, your peace for proximity. Dynamic emotional anchor plus blunt retention command. If you've ever felt that your worth in someone's life depended on what you could give them, don't move. Because by the end of this video, you'll learn how to finally stop being the product in someone else's story. And maybe that's where the real healing begins, not in being chosen again, but in unlearning the need to earn it. Because love that must be negotiated is not love at all. It's a transaction, disguised as tenderness, and it's time you broke the contract. By the time you reach adulthood, the lessons from your childhood don't disappear, they just learn how to dress better. The fear of losing love evolves into performance, and performance becomes personality. You wear it like armor, the mask of the reliable friend, the one who never says no, the one who shows up even when you're falling apart inside. People call you kind, selfless, dependable. And you smile because it sounds noble. But somewhere beneath that smile, you know the truth that your kindness isn't entirely pure. It's currency. It's how you make sure no one leaves. You've built a reputation on being the steady one, the listener, the healer, but notice how often you end the night feeling drained, not seen. How many conversations revolve around other people's storms while your own pain sits in silence? You tell yourself it's fine that you're stronger, more grounded, better equipped to carry it all. Yet the quiet resentment that follows isn't weakness. It's your soul whispering, "You've mistaken love for labor." Psychologists call this fawning behavior one of the lesser-known trauma responses. It's the nervous system's way of securing connection by pleasing others. When fight or flight feels dangerous, you learn to appease. You soothe conflict, anticipate needs, overextend because somewhere in your past, peace was the price of belonging. The adult you doesn't even question it anymore. Saying yes feels safer than risking rejection. Generosity becomes your survival strategy. But here's the cruel irony. The very mask that keeps people close also keeps you unseen. When you always play the caretaker, no one thinks to ask if you're tired. When you're always composed, no one believes you could be breaking. And when you give without boundaries, it attracts those who know how to take without. Guilt. You find yourself in one-sided friendships where loyalty flows only one way, where emotional reciprocity becomes a ghost that never arrives. You think you're protecting yourself from abandonment, but really, you're reenacting it over and over in adult form. Every "sure, I'll help," every "don't worry about me," every quiet sacrifice whispers the same desperate plea, "Please don't leave." Yet they still do, don't they? Because people who stay only when you're useful were never truly there for you. They were there for the version of you that served them. You tell yourself this is maturity, that giving endlessly makes you good. But goodness without authenticity is a performance, not virtue. You've built an identity around being indispensable without realizing it's slowly erasing you. And maybe that's the haunting truth, that some masks don't protect you from pain, they preserve it. Because when you live to be needed, you forget how to be loved, and that's the illusion that keeps the transaction alive. Somewhere inside your skull, long before logic arrives, a quiet accountant begins its work. It doesn't use numbers or words, but feelings. Every favor you give, every silence you endure, every kindness that goes unreturned, it records them. You may not realize it, but your brain has been tracking fairness long before you learned the word itself. The moment a relationship tilts out of balance, that inner accountant lights up like an alarm. You don't just notice it, you feel it. According to social neuroscience, imbalance in human relationships activates the same neural circuits as physical pain. In studies by Naomi Eisenberger and Matthew Lieberman, the anterior cingulate cortex, the region that registers both rejection and bodily harm, lights up when someone feels excluded or exploited. That's why one-sided relationships don't just hurt emotionally, they ache viscerally, like a bruise that doesn't fade. Your mind may rationalize it, whispering, "They're just busy," or "I shouldn't expect so much," but your body knows when the scales are uneven. Fairness, it seems, isn't just moral, it's biological. At the core of it lies the ancient principle of reciprocity, the social glue that made human survival possible. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors shared food, shelter, and safety through mutual exchange. Those who took without giving back endangered the tribe. Evolution punished them with isolation. Even now, your brain operates with the same code, give and receive, or risk disconnection. But what happens when you meet someone who knows how to exploit that instinct? Someone who gives just enough to keep you tethered, just enough to reset your trust. The opportunistic friend becomes a master manipulator of this system. They feed you intermittent rewards, a compliment here, a shared secret there, the same mechanism used in gambling and addiction. It's called variable reinforcement. Your brain releases dopamine, not when you're certain of love, but when it's unpredictable. This uncertainty keeps you waiting, hoping, investing. You confuse anxiety for excitement, imbalance for depth. Each act of giving feels like it might finally tip the scale, but it never does. Meanwhile, mirror neurons, the brain's empathy circuits, make you feel their happiness as your own. You mirror their emotions, anticipate their needs, and call it compassion. But it's often conditioning the same learned reflex that kept you safe as a child. When they smile after taking what they need, your nervous system interprets it as peace. And so, you keep giving, because peace feels like safety even when it's hollow. Inside, your brain tallies every unpaid emotional debt, every time reciprocity fails to return. Yet you stay, trapped between biology and belief, because somewhere deep down, your mind still hopes the numbers will balance that one. More act of kindness will make the friendship real. But what you'll soon learn is this: no one who truly values you keeps you indebted to them forever. The human heart can sense fairness, but the soul can only survive in truth. There's a point where kindness stops feeling holy and starts feeling like decay. It happens slowly, one small favor, one quiet compromise, one apology you didn't owe. You tell yourself you're doing the right thing, that being good means being needed, that love demands sacrifice. But deep down, something begins to rot. You start to notice how often your compassion ends with you exhausted, and how rarely anyone notices the pieces you leave behind. It's a strange kind of suffering to be loved for the comfort you give, not the person you are. There's a moment you can trace it back to a night when you said yes while your whole body screamed no, a friendship that survived only because you kept watering it even after it had already died. You became the candle that kept burning for others until all that was left was smoke. The well that refilled everyone but itself. This is what happens when goodness becomes compulsion, when you start confusing your worth with your usefulness. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden part of us that holds everything we repress, the anger, the bitterness, the truth we're too polite to say out loud. The good friend often carries a darker twin beneath the surface, one who silently screams every time they're taken for granted, one who resents the very people they're trying to save. But instead of facing this shadow, you push it deeper. You smile wider. You say, "It's fine," when it isn't. You become addicted to being seen as the selfless one, because being selfless feels safer than being abandoned. Psychologists say people-pleasing activates the same neural pathways as addiction, dopamine spikes, with each approval, each thank you, each moment of temporary peace. But like any addiction, the high fades fast. You give again, hoping to feel whole again, but the emptiness only grows. Resentment seeps in, like water through cracks. You start to notice that your kindness has been mistaken for consent, your silence for agreement, your boundaries for generosity, and suddenly you realize goodness can destroy too. You break quietly at first. You start withdrawing, doubting your own intentions. The fatigue turns spiritual, not just tiredness, but a kind of emotional erosion. You wonder if maybe you were never kind, just scared. Scared of being disliked, scared of being the villain, scared of showing the part of you that says no. But here's the truth. Jung never stopped reminding us of wholeness isn't about being good, it's about being real. Until you face your shadow, the anger, the exhaustion, the need for space, your kindness will always bleed from a wound. Because love without boundaries isn't purity, it's surrender. And no one sees your light clearly when it's burning itself to death. The next step isn't to stop giving, it's to learn how to give without disappearing. You've been taught that goodness means being reachable, that love means never saying no, that friendship means answering every call, replying to every message, showing up no matter how tired you are. Society worships the dependable one, the person who never complains, never withdraws, never disappoints. From childhood stories to modern films, the hero is always selfless, the one who sacrifices everything for others. You were told that being available makes you kind, but no one warned you that it could also make you invisible. Every culture has its own version of this myth. In religion, it's sanctified the idea that virtue is measured by how much of yourself you're willing to give away. In capitalism, it's commercialized. You become a product, a brand of kindness that others can consume without limit. Even online, the myth persists. Social media feeds filled with people broadcasting constant connection, answering everyone, caring for everyone, performing endless empathy. The world praises those who stretch themselves thin, and yet it quietly discards them when they finally break. Psychologists have a term for this cycle: compassion fatigue. It's what happens when your empathy becomes overexposed, when you absorb so much of others' pain that your own nervous system burns out. Studies show that people who feel compelled to always be available emotionally or physically have higher cortisol levels, lower immunity, and an increased risk of depression. But instead of calling it what it is, exploitation society calls it loyalty. The double standard is everywhere. Say yes, and you're generous. Say no, and you're selfish. You begin to internalize it. The guilt creeps in every time you set a boundary. You think of all the narratives that told you love is proven through suffering. You remember how dependable became a compliment you clung to, how the word selfish became a fear you ran from. The system rewards your exhaustion. Workplaces, relationships, even families thrive on the people who don't know how to stop giving. And the more you comply, the more the myth grows, until you start believing your emptiness is a sign of strength. But here's the truth no one wants to say. Self-erasure isn't noble, it's conditioning. This is how a culture built on transaction survives, by convincing the kind that their endless availability is a moral duty. You were never meant to be permanently open, endlessly accessible, always on call for the needs of others. A human being is not a service. Love without limits isn't virtue, it's vulnerability to misuse. The world won't give you permission to rest, but you can. Because what if true loyalty isn't about being there always, but about being there authentically? And maybe that's the quiet rebellion that comes next, to stop mistaking depletion for devotion, and begin defining goodness not by how much you give, but by how truthfully you live. There comes a moment quiet, unannounced, when the giving stops feeling good. You don't even remember the exact day it shifted. Maybe it was a late-night text left unanswered, or the silence after you poured your heart out. Maybe it was when you realized you hadn't been asked, "How are you?" in months. Whatever it was, something inside you broke softly, without sound. You began to see the pattern, not in words, but in absences. Every friendship you thought was mutual starts to look like an empty room you kept decorating for someone who never planned to stay. The collapse doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, the way exhaustion replaces enthusiasm, how you hesitate before replying, how your laughter feels rehearsed. You tell yourself you're just tired, that you're imagining it, but deep down you know you've become invisible in the very relationships you kept alive. It's a cruel irony. The more you gave, the less you were seen. Like sunlight through a window that never opens, your warmth kept shining into spaces that never returned it. Psychologists call this emotional neglect, but it doesn't need to be loud to destroy you. It's not betrayal in the obvious sense. No fights, no closure, just quiet erosion. Studies on trauma bonding explain why you stay even when you know the connection is hollow. Your brain confuses familiarity with safety. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, rewards you for loyalty, even to those who drain you, so you keep trying, because hope, not love, becomes the addiction. You wait for the version of them who cared, the one that existed only when you were useful, and the waiting itself becomes its own kind of grief. The nights stretch longer. You scroll through old messages, reliving the moments that once felt like belonging. You reread compliments that were really transactions, apologies that were really manipulations. You replay conversations in your mind, the times you comforted, the times you listened, the times you showed up, even when you were breaking. You wonder why no one noticed. You wonder if anyone ever would. This is the quiet collapse, not dramatic, not cinematic, but deeply human. The nervous system starts to dim. The body carries what the heart cannot say. You lose the desire to reach out, not because you hate people, but because connection now feels like currency you can no longer afford. And beneath it all, an ache settles, the ache of being needed, but never truly known. But here's the truth no one tells you. The collapse isn't failure, it's awakening. It's the soul's way of saying enough. It's the moment the candle refuses to burn for others who never bring a match. And from that stillness, something begins to stir, a question. Fragile but persistent. What if love didn't mean depletion? What if it meant being seen, even in your silence? Healing doesn't begin with revenge or withdrawal, it begins with truth. The quiet kind. The kind that sits with you in the stillness and asks, what if the love you've been chasing was meant to come from you all along? After years of performing, pleasing, and proving, you finally reach a place where exhaustion outweighs fear. You stop running toward people who mistake your light for a resource. You begin to see that the problem was never that you loved too much. It's that you forgot to include yourself in that love. Psychologists like Dr. Gabor Mate call this the return to authenticity over attachment, the moment you stop sacrificing your truth to keep others comfortable. You realize that the friendships that require your silence aren't safe. They're prisons with velvet walls. The first act of healing is disobedience, saying no when the world expects your yes. It feels wrong at first, almost cruel. But boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. They don't shut people out, they keep what's real inside. Carl Jung believed that integration, not avoidance, is how you heal the shadow. You don't destroy the part of you that needs to please, you understand it. You trace its origin back to that small child who learned that love had conditions, that safety had a cost. You tell that child the truth they never heard. You are not responsible for earning your place in someone's heart. This is shadow work, in its simplest, most human form, turning toward what hurts and saying, I see you, you can rest now. Self-compassion, as researcher Kristin Neff teaches, is not indulgence, it's inner reparenting. It's learning to speak to yourself with the same gentleness you've always reserved for others. When you fail, instead of shame, you offer understanding. When you feel lonely, instead of reaching for validation, you sit with the discomfort and let it pass not as punishment, but as practice. Because every time you choose to soothe yourself, you weaken the hold of those who once fed on your self-doubt. Brené Brown writes that vulnerability without boundaries is not courage, it's exposure. The goal isn't to stop loving people, but to stop offering love as proof of worth. You begin to give freely again, but now from abundance, not fear. You help because it feels right, not because you're terrified of disappearing. You listen without absorbing, love without losing, and exist without needing to be someone's constant supply. Neuroscience shows that new patterns of safety can rewire the brain. Every time you choose authenticity over appeasement, your nervous system relearns what peace feels like. Slowly, the anxiety fades. The fog lifts. Connection no longer feels like currency, it feels like home. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of healing, not becoming harder, but softer in the right places. The moment you stop performing love, you begin to experience it. Because real connection doesn't require your sacrifice, only your presence. What if love was never meant to be earned? What if friendship was never meant to be measured in effort, in favors, in how often you show up or how much you give? The thought unsettles you because it defies everything you've been taught. You've lived in a world that keeps score, a world that taught you to equate generosity with value, consistency with worth. But real friendship doesn't live in that economy. It begins where usefulness ends. You start to see it differently now, how the people who truly loved you never demanded your performance. They sat with your silence. They stayed through your stillness. They didn't need you to be entertaining or helpful or strong. They just needed you to be real. And that's the quiet miracle you'd overlooked your whole life. That presence, not productivity, is what makes connection sacred. The transactional bonds fade when the currency runs out. But those rare few who love you without reason, they stay even when you have nothing left to offer. In philosophy, Martin Buber called this the I-thou relationship, where two souls meet, not as means to an end, but as mirrors of existence itself. It's the difference between seeing someone and using them, between I like you because and I like you, period. In psychology, this echoes Carl Rogers' idea of unconditional positive regard to the purest form of love, untouched by expectation. It's radical in a world obsessed with leverage, because to love without agenda is to return to innocence, to reclaim the childlike wonder of being accepted just for being alive. Neuroscience even supports this truth. Genuine connection, the kind built on empathy, not exchange, releases oxytocin, lowering cortisol and soothing the body's stress responses. In other words, real friendship literally heals you. It rewires the nervous system, teaching it safety again. But the irony is that you only attract that kind of bond when you stop trying to prove yourself worthy of it. When you stop overgiving. When you stop performing. When you stop treating love like a contract. You've paid a high price for the illusion of belonging, exhaustion, resentment, the erosion of self. But the price of genuine friendship is different. It demands honesty. It asks you to show up without the mask, to let yourself be loved without earning it. And that's terrifying, because it strips away control. Yet, somewhere beneath the fear lies freedom, the kind that can only exist when there's nothing left to trade. So maybe the truest friendships are the ones that feel effortless, not because they require nothing, but because they rest on something infinite. Because when you finally stop measuring love in transactions, you discover something timeless. That to be seen, truly seen, without performance or payment, is the rarest form of wealth. And perhaps that's the quiet redemption at the end of this story, that what remains, after all the noise fades, is not who you impressed, but who stayed when you stopped trying.